Welcome to the Dave Palma Show, the podcast that revives, restores, and awakens your innermost capabilities.
You have the training and the talent to succeed, but do you have the guts to fail?
I love what I do. When you love what you do, you want to be the best at it.
Today is about the power of you. You will change the world.
Find your path to success through the journey of those who have succeeded. And now, your host, Dave Palma.
Hi, welcome back to the Dave Palma Show. And with me in this episode, I have the author of Anti-Racist Therapist from Montreal. He's an anti-racist psychotherapist from Montreal, Canada. He's been on my show before, and he's a recent author of a book called related to EMDR and racial trauma that's the last book he wrote, called Anti-Racist Psychotherapy. Confronting systemic racism and healing racial trauma, and he also now has just recently released a new self-help book called Black Meditation: 10 Practices for Self-Care, Mindfulness, and Self-Determination. David Archer, welcome back to the Dave Palma Show.
Well, thank you so much, Dave, for welcoming me back, and I'm blessed to be here.
David, so great to have you back on the show, and I'm sure you're going to be a regular contributor, over the time I'm having this show. And the show has been going on for about 4 years. I'm one of these podcasters that hasn't given up.
Nice.
It's been quite busy during this pandemic times and hard times.
Yeah, for sure.
Had another wave as well. So you've written another book since the last time we spoke. It's called Black Meditation. So can you tell me who this book's for and what it's about?
Yeah, so it's just that one of the reasons why I wrote the first book, Anti-Racist Psychotherapy, was because I felt that whenever we're talking about race or racial trauma or mental health with Black people, there is usually just this perspective where Black people are on the receiving end of the suffering, and there's not any dynamic that's there. It's almost as if you're talking about a victim with no one who victimizes. So that's why anti-racist psychotherapy was about understanding how there's a social context that contributes to the mental health or mental illness for certain types of individuals. And not only is it a social context, it's also a multi-generational context. There's a family systems context and all of that stuff. So the second book that I came out with, Black Meditation, it's more not so much about the philosophical understandings of racism, but it's like practical tools and techniques, strategies and skills that people can use to cultivate a positive Black identity, and also just to practice and get an introduction to mindfulness, to meditation, and just really to recognize your awesomeness. I've noticed that during this whole pandemic, which for a lot of people, I don't know about you, but sometimes it still feels like March of 2020 to me. And so, what I mean? It's like, it's been challenging. It's been challenging for a lot of people.
And we've got another wave now coming as well. Again, exactly. And the UK is in trouble with it at the moment.
Right.
In Europe, it's there's a few lockdowns, and the UK won't budge actually with lockdowns. People kind of two kind of groups of people. Some saying we don't want restrictions. Some saying let's do it.
And so it's just, again, is that it looks like at the end of this, we'll have gotten through the whole Greek alphabet. I don't know what language we're going to go through with all these variants, but
exactly.
It's just to say though, is that just like all jokes aside, is that it has been challenging for a lot of people, even me as a therapist, is that I've seen there's been this it's kind of like this desensitization relating to talking about mental health and mental illness. So there's a lot of people looking for therapy, but not a lot of therapists that can help them because there's so much, and there's much more. I think that it's a health crisis, but also a mental health crisis. So I wanted to kind of create a book that can help people outside of my office. I wanted to be able to give something to somebody outside of the reach of the therapist. Some people who probably aren't interested in therapy or can't find a therapist or can't find a therapist who's anti-racist. And just to just to be able to give them something that has a set of skills, practices, and tools so that they are able to be grounded in themselves, that they're able to cultivate self-love, and also to work on the idea of self-determination. So I do hope, it's a tall order. It's something that I attempted. I've received some like positive feedback from people around the world with it, but ultimately I just want to make it so that that people recognize that they do have what it takes in order to heal and recover. Our ancestors went through many challenging things, maybe not the same thing as we're going through right now, but they went through even more challenging things. And so just to know that we come from a long legacy of people who have overcome adversity. So just to tap into that connection to the ancestors, tap into this connection to the present body, so that we can make a better future for all of us.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Well, we can go through the 10 practices, and obviously maybe I can use myself as a case study in this case, because obviously, I, as a black firefighter, I mean, our last episode we did when I had you on the show was about a black firefighter that committed suicide, and I went through similar, challenges that he did, and
for sure
has some stresses, and it's a stressful job anyway. And the Black Lives Movement, you can see the kind of things that, obviously highlight it around the world, around the globe. But certainly my recent prostate cancer diagnosis, I've had to repatriate. So that was challenging because my family's still in the Philippines waiting for my wife's visa. Which obviously the British immigration system was probably similar to the Canadian one. It's challenging as it is, so I'm going through some pretty using meditation there. I've got some audiences on my coaching app where I do coaching on the meditation app. So, with the 6 million users there, I'm sure they'll appreciate listening to some of the stuff here as well. And
that's awesome.
Get out and buy your book as well.
Yeah.
Which I can suggest to them anyway through my coaching. So
you can suggest, and I recommend it. I highly recommend
it. That's what I meant.
I highly recommend that if people get this.
Whether it's through my website and this podcast interview, or the Aura app, meditation app I'm on, Mindfulness app I'm on, we'll certainly hear what you have to say now about these 10 practices, and how,
for sure,
as a case study myself, I could get through stuff, and how everyone else, reflects on everyone else. Yeah. So let's go.
Yeah. Like, I think that a lot of people, when they consider what meditation is, or when they think about it, it can be a little bit intimidating, and it makes sense, is because when we think of the meditator, we're going to think of a person who is probably on some tall mountain in the Himalayas, or we're going to think of like a person that is like usually like a person who's completely unconnected to our present way of looking at things, and maybe is far off in the past, or has a specific religion or spirituality. And so because there's a taboo with mental health, I think there's also a taboo with self-care in some ways. It's like we're going to have like the Instagram type of self-care, where it's like, living your best life, and everyone's in bikinis, and everyone is partying and sunshine and all that. But the thing is that I think that our self-care needs to be cultural. I think our self-care needs to be social. I think our self-care needs we need to upgrade our technology of relating to one another, our technology of relating to ourselves. And we need to focus on finding out different types of meditations. So I don't specifically have just one meditation. I even think the word meditation itself, it doesn't always mean a person who's sitting and attending to their breathing. Sometimes it is like a discussion. Sometimes it is like a stream of thought. And so it was 10 or it's actually about 12 chapters that are in the book, but it's just, there's 10 different skills and 10 different practices and 10 different words that center what the topic is going to be about for that chapter. And then in that specific chapter, there's a skill that helps to bring about like the idea, the general idea that it started with. So I'll kind of say it in plain English and be simple about it. It's like the first chapter is about cultivation. And that's because cultivation itself relates to the idea of tilling, tending to the land. And I look at it in terms of just building and setting a foundation. So before I teach about in the book, before I go into the discussion about what meditation is and how to sit, I want people to first understand with very simple technologies and very simple skills that they are much greater than their physical existence. They're much greater than their physical reality. And so there's some skills that just relate to just attending to the breath. Some skills relate to using a visualization. Everybody has the ability to imagine. You don't have to teach a child to have fun. You don't have to teach a child to imagine. They can imagine dragons and robots and unicorns. They're able to do this. But when we get older, it's like we forget that we have this infinite creativity that we have access to. And I believe that if we are able to sit and notice this creativity, if we are able to sit and practice being able to be more compassionate to our thoughts, to our way of life, to our experience, then we can transmute suffering into wisdom, which is one of the ideas behind this book, is that Blackness is usually associated with this, it's like you blackball somebody. There's a black list. Black itself is always associated with this bad thing, but that's an association created by the social structure. Yeah. So what we're trying to make sure is that from our own culture, from who we are as an individual, is that we can rewrite this narrative and instead define our Blackness based on our creativity, not the creativity that's based on racial trauma of white people, not the associations that are based on the media, the social media and all of that stuff, but something that comes from the heart. And when we can set aside some time to be silent, to sit, to breathe, to acknowledge the rhythm of our existence, and I think we can tap into something that's very deep. And I do believe that if people, regardless of whether it's my book, if people are able to practice with purpose, with discipline, with compassion, with strength, with resilience, these are many of the topics that are in the book. Right. Regardless of the practice, if they are able to assume these principles and if they are able to practice them, then they are able to find a way of cultivating their own spirituality. It's irrespective of one specific dogma or belief system. When I wrote this book, and I say it in the preface as well, is that I'm not trying to say that this is the one Black meditation. So I'm not trying to say that this is the one definition of Blackness or the one definition of meditation, but just for Black people to know that meditating is not outside of their culture. Meditating and feeling at peace is not outside of our reality. And many of our ancestors were the first physicians, were the first therapists before the word even existed, and also were some of the first healers of this world.
Fantastic. That's great. Well, what most people have to remember is that meditations come from the East, so the Western took it and made it their own in terms of, how it is now, but we have to make it our own as well,
Yeah, and the interesting thing about that, though, is that there's another book. This book's not my book, but I do think it's pretty awesome for your audience to know about it.
Yeah, sure.
It's called Our African Unconscious, The Black Origins of Mysticism and Psychology by Dr. Bynum. And what he talks about is how it's just a lot of what we even think is from the East. Some of it has some African origins. It's like, so I speak about it in the book as well, is that we call it Mitochondrial Eve. So one of the first members of our species, our ancestral mother, who we all share some DNA link with, she existed about 200,000 years ago. So 200,000 years ago, that's the first Homo sapiens in Africa. Yeah. So we were dark-skinned Black people for 200,000 years ago.
Yeah, and in the whole planet Earth.
Yeah. Exactly. And we were in Africa for all of that time. So that meant that we were all Black people for all of that time. And we developed technologies, we developed spiritualities, we developed all of these things like from that past. And so it's not to say that Africans or Black people invented like everything that's in the East, but it's impossible to say that some of the ancient Egyptian mystery schools did not influence, or the mysticism did not influence the Abrahamic religions, or that the African origins did not influence the practices, the ideas related to Kundalini, related to chi, energy, life force that exists in the East, because Egyptians were talking about it. So if they were talking about it thousands of years ago, like 3000 BC, they're talking about it in Egyptian schools, then if there's other practices that came up after them that seem to have some similarities, it's hard to say that there's not an African influence, that it's not that we all come from a similar source.
Yeah. There would be one controversial thing, is if, someone might turn around and say, "Oh, I'm going to make a book called White," because this happened in the fire service. "Oh, we're going to make a white union," but obviously,
oh, they already do.
Yeah,
they already do.
Exactly. That's exactly where it is. So
they already do. Yes,
this is a kind of conversation that might sort of it's just people that they're probably people that don't practice it properly anyway.
Yes, but the thing is, I do encourage a white meditation. I think if white people are like, we have specific needs and we need to, I'll say that you guys already do. Like, it's just, I'm raised in a society that looks at myself as the outlier. And, when I'm in my home, statistically, I'm actually the majority. And also when I look at the world population, statistically, most people are dark-skinned individuals. So, I mean, it's really just to say that, it's all about context, and it's all about the what data you're looking at. But I believe that I just wanted to write something that I haven't been able to see before. I'm that type of artist, is that I want to create things I've never seen before or never experienced before. If there's a white person who's like, "What? Black meditation? I'll make a white meditation." I'll say, yeah, sure. The thing is, if white people can heal and resolve their racial trauma that comes from whiteness. There's one day where I went to, in New York City, they had Ripley's Believe It or Not. And you go into this it's kind of like, I don't even know how you describe it, but it's like, they show pictures of the person who had the biggest foot, the person who had the largest, the fastest bird, all of this stuff. But they spoke about these things that were in Europe, and it was like torture devices. Yeah. We know that in the Dark Ages, that there was a lot of like torture devices, guillotines, iron maidens. There's like terrible things that existed through history, and there were witch burnings. And so I believe that a lot of this difficult things that white people themselves went through in Europe, that still stays on in the genealogy of the racial trauma of white people. This is where some of the present day violence comes from. When we talk about like how white supremacy is not only violent towards Black people, it also hurts white people. So if there is a white meditation that can help to heal the trauma that is within the white person's body, by all means. For me, I am trying to find a way to make it so that Black people, that we don't feel that we can't heal anymore. So if it's possible that we can make a white meditation, if that's going to help.
And to make sense of what you spoke about there, in the Black Lives Movement, it's certainly all over the world. There was black and white protesters against racism joining together, and white people killing white people, like that guy, the young kid who shot down another, white protester.
Although I disagree. I think that the people he killed were not white people. This is the strange thing.
All right.
Is that whiteness itself occupies this weird thing where it's not race dependent. It's like whiteness itself is the idea that you can go to a foreign country and you can claim ownership of their resources. And if people rebel, that you can destroy them or attack them and say it's self-defense. And that's what that young person did.
Yeah.
You're talking about Kyle Rittenhouse, is that?
Yes.
He went to a different place. He went across state lines. Yeah. And he was there to defend property.
Yeah.
And then after the people that he killed, they weren't portrayed as white. It's that he was portrayed as white. So there was a big sense of urgency of protecting him, that he himself was in danger, because when you advocate for Black people, you lose that privilege.
Yeah.
So it's a strange thing that takes place. And if everybody is to come together and realize that that racists are actually outnumbered, there's more of us than them, then it'll make sense for why there are a lot of white people who do support Black Lives Matter. Yeah. Because the thing is, I think people are starting to understand this racism thing. Actually, it doesn't benefit white people. There's no white person I've met who really does believe they're at the top of the ladder. There's like even the white man who is assumed to have all of the privileges, even all the billionaires that we have that are flying spaceships into the atmosphere. They can never go high enough.
You're not talking about Oprah, obviously.
No. I'm talking about the others.
Elon Musk and Richard Branson, our very own Richard Branson.
yeah. And it's just, but I feel that they can never go high enough. I feel that they can never make enough money, and that's because they're not at the top of the ladder. Because even a millionaire needs a psychologist, and so that's why this idea of whiteness as being the absolute, the idea of white supremacy, the difficulty in being a white person is that concept even escapes them. White supremacy does cause damage to Black people, of course, because we're in this comparison with it. But no white person feels as if they really do have all of the privileges, because they still need therapists. Yeah.
So, two examples, like you say, two of them that commit suicide is that paedophile, I forgot his name now, where there's a big case going on.
Yes.
And also McCarthy.
You're talking about Epstein, is that it?
Epstein, yeah. And McCarthy, who is a bit of a renegade. I think he sounded like a good guy, but he is obviously very renegade with his billionaire status, But these people obviously needed to do things like meditation and stuff like that.
Well, it's because the thing is that no matter how much money you have, it doesn't erase the trauma. Exactly. There's a lot of suffering that is in our present day situations, but there's also a lot of suffering that comes from what we carry, like the wounds of our ancestors, as I speak about in the book. I know this topic we're on is very far off from, because I don't mention these. The book also is like intended not to center whiteness in the discussion. So it's explicitly Black. And I write at the beginning that it is explicitly Black. The reader isn't meant to know that the author is Black, and it's for a Black audience specifically. Yeah, a Black audience. But if there are people who read it and are interested in a perspective that's different from their experience and benefit, then that's all the better. I know that a lot of my readership is white people, because there's many white people who they understand that this racism thing it actually is contributing to climate change, it's contributing to vaccine inequity, and is not helping. It's not helping any of us. Yeah. So that's my political rant. But,
that's right. But, exactly.
But with regards to the
let's get back to the book, because obviously it kind of illustrated exactly why it is. People need to read the book, really. So let's see how these 10 practices work before we point people to how we can, get hold of the book, really.
Sure. Yeah, it's because ultimately it's a strange thing, because race itself doesn't really exist. Race itself is it's a creation. They weren't really talking about race in the same way in the times of ancient Greece. They weren't really talking about it in the same way in the times of ancient Egypt, which is called Kemet. And also is that race is really a creation that was built for colonization as a justification to say certain people are less human. Therefore, because the idea is that man is supposed to have be able to dominate people that are like animals and land. That's why you can travel to a different country, claim land over people who are not really people. Yeah. Like take their land because it's not really theirs, because they don't have the same concept of ownership. And the strange thing is that as advanced as we thought, and as advanced as the colonizer thought, and as advanced as our society thought it was, now we see ourselves returning back to these old practices of healing like meditation, which the indigenous people understood about. These old practices of like using herbal, like organic, like healthy eating, and all. Like our ancestors were doing this for millennia. They were already understanding that it's about what you eat, it's about what you think about, it's how you speak to one another. So all that Black meditation is an attempt for me to, by with my own practice of what has been helpful for me and the people I've worked with, and also from my own intuition, I do feel I was pushed by the ancestors to write something like this. Just an attempt to get people to reconnect to their past, and just to know that they're much greater than they even feel and understand in the present. But when we are talking about these news reports, and it's very interesting that you know about the Kyle Rittenhouse thing, because I'm also not an American, and the thing is that it's like the American psychological struggles, because right now it's a very challenging time to be an American. I'm sure anyone can, even us outside of your country are like, yo, guys, like this is pretty intense. But the interesting thing is that there's media, there's stories that come out that grab our attention. So the idea for self-care and for self-help is to recognize when our mind is going off focus and to return back to the center. The media images that they'll put about violence towards Black people is to reinforce a certain narrative that will never challenge whiteness, but will instead maintain the status quo. So the media images you'll see of certain people doing crimes and getting off and all of this stuff because of the complexion of their skin, these are just meant to reinforce a narrative. The only way that we can heal from it is when we just unplug from media sources that are not serving us. The only way we can do it is when we decide to get curious about what happens on the inside instead of getting caught up with, the tweet of the day,
exactly.
The media report of the day, because that stuff is really not good for our mental health.
No, they're starting to they're starting to talk about that as well now, aren't they? Really, I mean, they kind of got accused of, I think, Facebook and Instagram. And, I think when he changed, Zuckerberg changed the name to Meta.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's not bad anymore. Now we're Meta. We're no longer Facebook. Facebook is just something. We changed our name. We're good now. But that's the same thing. It's a similar type of thing if we talk about whiteness and race, is that race, these are just labels. So they actually do change over time. Whenever the number of white people decrease in North America, and they probably do it in England as well and in Europe as well, is that certain people become white. Maybe race is a little different in Europe. It's probably not as like, it's similar, but probably different in some contexts, in some ways. But it's just that there were times when Irish people were not white in this country. There were times when Italians were not white, when Greek people were not white. And it's like, I did a presentation in California, a virtual presentation, relating to the topics of anti-racist psychotherapy and Black meditation. And there was a white person who she left a comment just saying that she was trying to understand her whole life why her father, who was Scottish, would fight to change his accent so that he could assimilate into an American lifestyle. And through his whole life, he fought and was a racist towards other people and other groups of individuals. And he lived and died as a racist white person. And she said from this presentation, she finally understood that whiteness is a category that is based off of this fight or flight or free survival instinct. And that took her father away. Instead of being able to acknowledge and to honor his Scottish heritage, he had to fight to get into a category and fight to stay in a category. So the only way that we're going to be able to recover from these traumas of racism is if we just recognize it, learn to accept the suffering that we're going through, validate our experience of the suffering, and ultimately we show compassion to it. When it's like, it may not always seem like it, but sometimes the bravest thing and the most courageous thing we can do is to sit. That's what the meditation is. The meditation is really just for you to take some time to just sit and reflect, and without any judgment on the thoughts, without a judgment on the process of whether I'm doing it right, whether I'm doing it wrong, whether I'm sitting correctly, do I need to adjust how I'm sitting? Just to acknowledge the process, and through our
kind
suffering.
of neutral.
Yeah.
Sitting and neutrally thinking.
Yeah.
Without judgment.
Right. And what happens is when we're able to notice it and sit with it, then wisdom takes place. Because anytime we successfully overcome suffering, we gain experience for the next time that the suffering takes place. If we go, even our immune system works in a similar type of way. Like the first time that we get sick from something, it's a little rough. Sometimes, in some cases, I'm not going to act like I'm an epidemiologist or master of this stuff, but just follow along with the metaphor. So the thing is that sometimes when we encounter something and then we encounter it again, the immune response can be different. And like, depending on how we've been able to deal with the first one, it can be a little different the second time around. So the way how I look at it is that we need to be conscious in our confrontation with suffering. Instead of being passive recipients of the terrible things we see on the media, the images of who they want to celebrate, who they're going to say is white, pitting white people against black people, pitting black people against themselves. Instead of all of that noise, which is part of the narrative that divides individuals, we need to start to think about the things that matter. And the thing that matters is that we're all descendants of the same ancestral mother. So technically, we're all family. And when we are able to engage with this idea that we're all family, that we're all one people, then something different happens. And so I ventured to see what can happen if I could compile some of the things that have helped other people to heal, and see if it can help some other people to heal who didn't even know that they're capable of greatness by virtue of who they are. That a person is black, therefore they're beautiful, and they're beautiful, therefore they're black. Instead of this idea of the previous narrative, we change that up and we see that that we're beautiful because we exist.
Yeah. I mean, talking about greatness, I mean, there are black athletes that practiced meditation. The late Kobe Bryant,
yes.
He swore by it. LeBron James, is it? I forgot. He's actually doing some audio, like I'm, a coach and a meditation act. He's done it on Headspace, which is one of the leading ones. So he's done some audio there as well, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously football. I don't know if you call it soccer or football in Canada. We call it football, but
it makes logical sense to call it football. To tell you the truth, we call it soccer. Yeah, it makes logical sense.
Well, one of our most successful black player who had extreme racism, especially from the terrorists, took up meditation this year, and he's now an ambassador for Headspace as well. But
it's amazing.
So these are great people, and he said meditation helped a lot. He was already great before he took it up, but it helped him a lot. Even more so.
It's because the thing is with the athlete is that naturally they condition their body to do great things. Yeah. And so it's not a stretch of the imagination that they can then condition their mind to do great things. And also, many of the athletes are actually geniuses, if you think about it.
Yeah.
Even if because it's a mathematical equation to be able to throw the ball into the basket from a certain distance and at a certain speed with a certain amount of force. It's just that what we consider as being intelligence is culturally dependent and socially, it depends on the social context of it.
Right.
But these are geniuses, not only because of the skill of their body, but it's easy to see how they can generalize practicing and refining the skill of the muscle memory to then practicing and refining that skill of self-compassion and of knowing, because that's a lot of what this book is about as well.
Great. Well, I hope where we're talking about whether you're a billionaire or someone who's not, very humbly doing a low paid job, even people like LeBron James or our own sports people, whoever, whether they're millionaires or not, I hope they come across this podcast and see Black Meditation and pick up your book and buy it. And saying that, where can our audience and buy your book and the other book as well that you have out? And I'm sure you're going to write many more.
Yeah, well, both books are available at it's like Barnes and Noble, Amazon, yes, yeah. Of course. The man who flies rockets into it. Yes.
Another one. Actually, I don't think he's done a rocket yet, but he's got enough money to do it, I think.
Oh, no. Bezos, yeah, he flew a rocket.
Did he? Oh, right. Yeah, okay.
He did.
Jeff Bezos.
Yes. Yeah. Bezos, they call him.
Bezos, yeah.
Bozos is what they call him in the UK. But
okay. That's it. My own pronunciation, actually. I don't know if it's my dyslexia or whatever saying that.
Oh, no, that's
not
cool,
being able to pronounce it. Yeah,
that's cool. I mean, the thing is that we're speaking a language that is a colonizer language, anyways. I mean, the thing is that sometimes people will be like, "Hey, how come you don't speak French?" And in my head, I'm like, "But I should be speaking like Swahili or something."
Yeah.
My ancestors probably existed before these languages even existed. Anyways, that's getting too deep.
My father's from Mauritius, and obviously his language is Creole.
Yeah.
That's French as well. But it's in English, like the official language is English. So
yeah, and that's what I speak about. There's a part of the book I speak about that too. Is that we can't neglect our Africanness. So like being able to speak, they call it African American vernacular English. Yeah. In my culture, they call it Jamaican patois, and in some of my other family members, it's Haitian Creole. And it is very important that we, instead of us saying we should speak the proper English, it's like we have to understand that like language is just a way of connecting with people. We don't need to make it such a terrible thing. But yeah, so the thing is that it's this book, unfortunately, because of my lack of knowledge of languages, is only available in English. But I'll be working on if there's someone interested.
When you get the resources, it can be translated, obviously. So.
Yeah. That's the next step. I would love to make it available in different languages. But it's really just, you can go on Amazon and you can get a few copies. And I would say, though, that Anti-Racist Psychotherapy is like that philosophical, the understanding for how we get to the ideas of talking about racism completely different. And then Black Meditation is a way out of that cycle of consistently attending to social media and getting hurt by these thoughts. And instead, practicing some skills, techniques that just help you to feel grounded and get in touch with that inner awesomeness that every person deserves to experience and to recognize that it's their birthright to feel good about themselves.
Fantastic, David. Fantastic. Well, it's always great to talk to you on the show and I get some value from you, and you give my audience some value. So,
thank you.
I'm going to have you back more and more. There's always some issue going on somewhere where we need something like this as well. In fact, even more so now. Yes. So we'll have you back again, David. But at the moment, I'd just like to say thanks a lot for coming and sharing your book and your knowledge and your, everything that you do with my audience today.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm just a mirror reflection of the person I'm speaking to. Thank you again for taking the time to help your audience. And I hope that this book can help other people to know that the world deserves them and that they're deserving of the world, and that we must practice together to work as a global family, because that's where we all come from. We're all cousins, aunties, and uncles.
Well, once again, David, thanks very much.
Many blessings. Thank you.
That's all for this episode. Thanks for listening. And remember, if you want to support what we do, then share, subscribe, and leave a review over on Apple Podcasts. Or head over to my website, davepalmer.com, and click on Rate Show. Well, that's all for now, but I'll see you in the next episode of The Dave Palmer Show.
Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.